Well, thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. So I don't know how many of you know who I am, but what am I? I wear a lot of hats. So I was the bicycle program manager of the city of Portland, Oregon in the 1990s, kind of what DK's position is here in Fort Collins. And then since then, I've been running a consulting firm that's called Alta Planning and Design, and we work all across North America to help create more bicycle and pedestrian-friendly communities. And I teach bicycle and pedestrian planning, and I've written a book about my experiences, and it's called The Joyride. It's called Joyride. What a coincidence, huh? Go figure. Okay, so I live in Portland, and I love Portland. Who's been to Portland? Cool place, right? Yeah. And so you've been there, and you've recognized you bike there, and it's an amazing place to bike, and you think, oh, people just ride bikes here. It's like bikes just kind of came from the sky, and thousands of people started biking, and that's just a myth, and I'm going to dispel that for you tonight with the truth about how we got to where we are in Portland. And maybe, I know you're amazing here in Fort Collins and have done amazing things, but what do you want to do next is kind of the question that I often pose with cities. Now, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and had 3 little brothers, and you would have found me at age 14 or 15 with a TV remote in one hand and Dunkin' Donut in the other hand. And then by the time I was 15, my mom marched me down to the DMV to get my driver's license so I could cart around the 3 cuties to all their soccer games. So I was a soccer sister. And we both thought, freedom, yes, I've got a car now, I can drive the boys around. And then I quickly realized, I'm driving, there's congestion, I'm sitting in the car all the time. And by the time I was a teenager, I was really overweight and depressed. And no wonder, that car culture USA, that sedentary lifestyle, not so good for our kids. So fast forward to age 21, and one of my brothers says, take my bike. And I say, no, why would I take your bike? Why would I do that? I mean, we drove everywhere in Dallas, right? My sister's here, you guys. So we drove everywhere in Dallas. Why would we ride a bike, huh? What? And Bruce says, take my bike. And I go, why would I do that? And he says, this so-called environmentalist, why don't you get off your lazy butt and ride? Then maybe you'll stop whining about being so fat. And now, there's my brother is quite sarcastic, but I take him quite seriously. Anyway, so I did take his bike, and I went up to Washington, D.C. with his bike. It was an old 10-speed Schwinn, and that's a giant Innova that I started riding after that. And the very first time I started riding, I couldn't even get up the most pathetic hill without pushing. It was in terrible shape. But after a couple weeks, I'd lost weight and felt great. And I had all this energy surging through me, and I started biking everywhere, to friends' houses and to bars and to school and to my job and everything. And pretty soon I had fell so in love with biking that I gave up my car and became car-free. And bicycling became my main means of transportation from then on. So that was about 1990. So biking has been my main means of transportation for almost my whole adult life. And then my first job was researching international transportation issues. And in growing Latin American and Asian cities, I saw massive investments being poured into road building. And the results were thick congestion and horrific air quality and health and safety problems. And then I also saw European and Japanese cities where they were focusing on compact development and walking and bicycling and transit. And in those cities, congestion went down and bicycling and health and air quality and safety improved. And this epiphany kind of went off in my head as I was biking for transportation and then also seeing all this stuff, and that is that I wanted to transform American cities into bicycle-friendly places, because we Americans consume more than 1/3 of the world's oil, and a big chunk of that is on our transportation habits. And so if we can become part of the solution, then that's what I wanted to do. And I thought to myself, wouldn't that be neat to do it in a place like Portland, Oregon, for example? And amazingly, I landed this amazing job in Portland, Oregon. Now, this is our dad, Tommy. And Tommy's from East Texas, right? And he says to me, this environmental crap is for y'all hippies. Americans are not going to ride bikes to work. And this was reflective of the family's opinion at the time. You're going to do what? In Portland, what? Where? Who? What? Some kind of Greenpeace thing? You're going to, well, why'd y'all have to blow up that boat? And it's like a tree hugging. Totally didn't get it at all. So that's Tommy, representative of the family. So I moved to Portland, Oregon. And as I said, Portland didn't just all of a sudden start riding. People in Portland didn't just all of a sudden start riding these bikes that miraculously appeared. Portland was built around the streetcar in the early era of the early 1900s, late 1880s, early 1900s. And then the car came to Portland in the World War II era, and then after that, highways were built in all directions, ripping through neighborhoods, out to the suburbs, like most of the rest of America, okay? Very normal. And by the time we got to the 60s, we had this famous postcard in Portland, "Be careful crossing the street in Portland, Oregon." We had terrible air quality problems, terrible congestion problems. This is downtown Portland at the time. Basically surface parking lots, yeah. Can you believe that? Isn't that crazy? And businesses were fleeing out to the suburbs, and so were middle-class families. The schools were emptying of kids. So Portland was really in tune with the rest of the country at the time, really heading downhill fast. Now, there was one more highway left on the books of this era. This is like the 70s. So we had, this is Portland, and we have these black lines are the highways that have already been built. And then there's one more that's on the books, and this would be the Mount Hood Freeway, which would go to Mount Hood, which is out here, 11,249 feet. It's not that big, right? Not that big, but it's the biggest one in Oregon. We like our skiing too, but it's a wet snow. It's just not that good. It's just not that good. But we can be cross-country skiing in an hour, so that's okay, right? So it's, to get there, honestly, the driving route is a bit circuitous. Like you'd have to go on this freeway and then get this other connecting one. And so the planners of the day wanted to have a freeway that went right to Mount Hood because it is a big economic generator, as is all of your mountains here. So I lived right here when I moved to Oregon, right smack in the middle of where the Mount Hood Freeway would have gone. And this neighborhood that I lived in was pretty downtrodden, as you can imagine, because for decades and decades, these residents had been told the government is going to come take your property. And that's a good way to dampen home improvement, desire and investment and whatnot. And then what happened was in the 70s, residents had had enough, and they formed a group called STOP, Sensible Transportation Options for People. And they fought hard against the Mount Hood Freeway, and they won. And instead of the Mount Hood Freeway, we got our first light rail line. And one of those downtown parking lots was transformed into our town square called Pioneer Square. It's quite a lovely place. And then along the waterfront in downtown Portland has the Willamette River running through it. Half of a highway was transformed into a park. And you really can't overstate the impact of these transformational projects on the culture and the spirit of Portland. And regional leaders got into the act too. And so the suburbs around Portland got together with Portland, and they adopted this urban growth boundary, this thick black line. And outside the urban growth boundary, you can't build any more suburbs. And that would protect our farmland, because Portland is a wonderful place. There's a lot of good food for a reason. It rains a lot, 9 months of the year. So yippee, but we get really good food as a result of that. And so there's a lot of sprawl within the lines, but outside the lines you can't sprawl, so that was a good thing. And they decided to invest in a regional network of green spaces and started thinking about trails. And all in all, the leaders of the region debated, and they talked, and they fought, and they grew solid in their mutual understanding that land use, which is the places that we live and work and play, go hand in hand with transportation, how we get there, and that this conversation needs to be part of the same conversation all the time. So that was one of the great things about Portland at the time. And they talked about developing in a way that's compact, and we can have livable and walkable neighborhoods, and kids can walk and bike to school and all that good stuff. Now, we didn't have a lot on the realm of biking when I first started in Portland. So I moved to Portland in 1993. And at that time, we had almost no bikeways. We had had a couple of bike commute days, and we had some little signs on some streets that said bike route. But we had a new politician. His name's Earl Blumenauer, and he was a city councilman. We also had a new advocacy group called the Bicycle Transportation Alliance. And so we had a politician that was really into biking, and we had an advocacy group that was pushing the city. And then we had a new staff person, me, who had arrived in Portland to take this fabulous job of bicycle coordinator. So that was all the good news. The bad news, we had almost no bikeways at all, okay? Most of our streets look like this. And we had almost the entire city bureaucracy, all the people working in the government. I mean, their job for, let's say, 80 years had been to build and operate a system to move cars around. And now they're being told you're supposed to think about bikes, and they were completely baffled by me. In every department, in every way, shape, and form, and I quickly realized that my job was a lot more than just trying to convince the public to bike. It was also about reforming the entire government structure, and that it was going to take a while. It was going to take a little bit of time to do this. most of these people don't ride bikes, so how are they going to even grasp what we're trying to do? And then I went to talk to the business community. I thought, okay, bike parking. We'll start with bike parking. You guys know what good bike parking looks like. And the business community is like, bike parking. Now, why would we do that? Bike parking, because, I mean, there's plenty of bike parking already, and nobody's using the bike parking that's out there. And I'll tell you what, they said, when there's a demand for bike parking, that's when we'll put in more. Yeah, and I would show them these pictures, which all came from that era, and I would say, come on, work with me, people. It's on the 3rd floor of the parking garage, behind the dumpster. So there's not going to be a big demand for this bike parking, right? And then the next argument they would say is, okay, wait a second. What are you going to make us put in next? Ski racks? Toy chests? That's my daughter Sasha when she was a baby. And because they thought the bicycle was one of two things, right? It's either a sport or it's a toy. Which, okay, let's face it, it is a sport, right? We all know that in Fort Collins for sure. And it is a toy. Those are good things. But it's also a serious means of transportation. So how are we going to get that into these heads? So basically what happened, lots of resistance, lots of negativity. The media slammed us all the time. And we had a really, really, really long way to go. This picture was shot like on my 2nd week of the job. I'm like, I thought this was like my dream job, but what? Oh my God, this is like a nightmare. Okay, so I started hauling a bike trailer around the city with slides and brochures and maps and coupons and stuff, and I would talk to anybody who would listen, like neighborhood associations and business groups and PTAs and churches and like Rotary clubs, whoever would listen to me, right? And I would talk to them about the health impacts of sedentary lifestyles and air quality problems and the high cost of driving and congestion. And honestly, I was kind of a bummer. People don't like to hear that stuff. Just bad news, all the bad news, all the bad news. And I would talk about the healthcare crisis that we're having. And even back then, this was 20 years ago, we were already in trouble. I mean, at that point, approximately 14% of the country was already considered clinically obese. And the health impacts are enormous. It's arthritis and high blood pressure and heart disease and strokes and even cancers. And 1/3 of our kids are severely overweight. And many of them developing adult diabetes now, and it's $160 billion a year that we're spending on the health impacts of sedentary lifestyles. And so, and then 5 years later, this was like 1990, by 1995, like half the country had moved up to almost a 20% range. 5 years after that, do you notice 3 new colors to express the crisis that we're in? And then today, we've got basically more than 2/3 of the country, more than a quarter of the population is suffering, really suffering these consequences. So I would talk about these bummer kind of things. And then I'd also talk about the solutions, okay? If you go to these European cities, you see these amazing things. And we can put in bike lanes that you've got all over Fort Collins, and we can do, I don't know if you have you don't really have a network of these yet, but bicycle boulevards, which are on neighborhood streets. You take neighborhood streets and you do all these things to make them amazing for bikes, okay? Slow down motor vehicles, really make them, it's like a path. It's like being on a separated path or a driveway or an alley where you let cars drive on it, but it's really the priority on the streets is for biking and walking. Amazing. So I live on one, the best one in Portland, and it's a fantastic place to live. I mean, there's thousands of people biking by my house every day, and yes, there are cars, but they go very slowly. We coexist. And then you got your off-street paths. So those are our tools, and we can put in really good bike parking, and we can educate the citizens. We can encourage kids to bike. Obviously there's tons of stuff that we can do that's in our toolkit. So it's not just the bad news, we've got the good news too. Now, in every group, I would find that 2 or 3 or 4 people would come up to me at the end. Now, most would be nervous and they'd go run for their cars. But 2 or 3 or 4 in every group would come up to me at the end and they'd say, my doctor told me to get more exercise, so can I get a bike map? Or they'd say, I would love my kids to be able to bike to school because I used to, but it's not safe anymore. So how can I do that? And I figured that if in every group 2 or 3 or 4 were talking to me, that meant that, I was influencing like 10 to 20% of the people were like opening their hearts and minds, and that I was on the right track. And so these people became like our spokespeople, our army. And in 1996, we adopted this visionary bike plan for a network of bikeways in Portland, a comprehensive network of bikeways. And our policy was going to be to make the bicycle an integral part of daily life. And we declared that a revolution was underway. I gathered a team around me of some really excellent people through kind of grants and hook and crook, to find some amazing people. And we started putting in bikeways in Portland. So a lot of them we put in by narrowing travel lanes. So you take just a street like this and kind of tighten up all the lanes. We call that a road diet or a lane diet, kind of reallocating the extra like chubbiness to healthy infrastructure like bike lanes. And sometimes we would trade off a whole travel lane. And this is a great story, but one day, so I went to the maintenance bureau, okay, and I said to these guys, here's my bike plan, and wouldn't it be swell if whenever you're like resurfacing a road for routine maintenance, you could put in the bike lanes? And the guys at the maintenance bureau said, no, we don't do it that way. Thanks for stopping by. Go on, go on with your little self, and that was the end of it. But then I was a Saturday, and I was at home, and this guy, Rod Yoder, the head of the paving crew, he calls me and he says, I'm standing out here on Southeast 7th, and I've got your bike plan, and I've got your map here, and it says that you want bike lanes on this street. So where's the striping plan? And I go, oh, well, I'll call you back. Because I had no striping plan. I didn't really know what a striping plan was. But I'm pretty sure I didn't have one since I didn't even know what it was. And so I called the traffic engineer, who's a guy who bikes, and he's a really good guy. And I go, say, Doug, they're standing out there on Southeast 7th. Can you help us out? We need a striping plan. And he goes, all right, I'll meet you out there. All right. And so we go out there, and he says, he's ready to do it. And I'm like, a little nervous. Like, we're going to get in trouble, because it's one thing to have a plan like on the books, like on paper, where it's, it's a line on a map and somebody studied it. But it's quite another on a weekend in a business district to come in and trade off a travel lane. And we're a little nervous. And Doug says, it's safer to have a 3-lane configuration than a 4. And if we don't do it now, we're not going to get it done. So let's do it. And so we do this. And so Monday morning comes, and the phone starts ringing. And first there's Earl Blumenauer, okay, city commissioner on the phone. Mia, what is going on Southeast 7th? Did you stripe bike lanes there this weekend without any permission? I'm like, well, it's on 2 plans that were adopted by the city, and I got this. I'm going to go apologize right now. So I went out to the street, and I put notes on every doorstep that said, this is part of adopted plans, and if you have any questions, please give us a call. And I got a lot of phone calls, but the phone calls, interestingly enough, weren't really about the bike lanes. They were about, well, there's that truck loading zone that's too short, or the signal timing doesn't really work, and they weren't really complaining about the bike lanes. And I sort of realized that just giving them a phone number is what really triggered them to make phone calls. And life went on, and the street was performing just fine, and traffic congestion didn't, go nuts, and Earl, everything kind of settled down after a couple weeks, and people started biking, a few, first 10, and then 20, and then 100, and then 1,000. And every day, that is. And we realized at this point that sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. Sometimes, kids. Not always, except for always ask permission of your mom. Now, Portland is a city that has a lot of bridges because of the Willamette River. So we have 5 bridges in downtown Portland. And we learned in our public outreach process that if we don't fix the bridges, everybody said loud and clear, like it's, we want to bike here, we want to get to downtown, but if you don't fix these bridges, it's a deal breaker. Because every one of these bridges had crummy narrow sidewalks, no bike lanes leading up to them. The surfaces are slippery grates. Like there's nothing about these bridges that worked at all. And so they said, you got to fix the bridges. So we got a grant, and we developed a plan to upgrade the bridges. And as you can imagine, to fix built infrastructure like that is very costly and very time consuming and very complicated. So the first one that we said we would do was on this bridge called the Burnside Bridge. And this is because this was going to be really pretty much the easiest. So we had 6 lanes, and we were going to take it down to 5, trade off that 1 travel lane and put in 2 bike lanes like this. This is what it looks like. All right? Doesn't seem that complicated, and it technically kind of worked on paper. And our traffic engineer, Rob Birchfield, he said, I'm willing to do this. Let's get this done. But honestly, on paper it looked good, but we were really nervous. Like the media was slamming us all the time, and so we were worried, would gridlock, would it just trigger this massive gridlock? And would angry motorists like literally storm City Hall and throw out the mayor? What would happen? But Earl Blumenauer, who's our politician on bikes, he said, no. We are not going to hide, okay? This is not a stealth operation. It's a celebration because this is our first bridge in Portland that's going to have bike lanes, and let's do it with style. And so we said, oh, all right, if that's what you want us to do, we'll do. So we hired a band, and we rented some porta potties, and we declared Bikefest on the Burnside Bridge a car-free celebration of alternative transportation. And we told the media the bridge is going to be closed for a day, but it's open to anybody that wants to walk or bike, come on down. And honestly, we had no idea what to expect. And the night before, the crews came out and repainted the lane lines, and so there was no turning back. And that morning, it was a beautiful day, but it was very, very windy. And so we're up on the bridge, and we've got these balloons, and they're blowing all over the place, and we're trying to hold down all our brochures and our papers, and we've got this band up there, and we're ready to go, and we're waiting, and people start to arrive slowly, slowly, slowly. And I got to tell you, by noon, there were 10,000 people up on that bridge. 10,000 people celebrating on that bridge. And we learned at this point, we had this epiphany, that it's not just the stripes, right? The stripes are important, but it's not just the stripes, it's the attitude. Because if we build and operate our systems around people driving, then that's what we're going to do. But if we build and plan and operate and around biking and walking, and then not only do we build it, but we encourage people to do so, we embrace it as in ways that are really meaningful to people's daily lives, then that's what they'll do. And that as transportation departments, that we had to see ourselves as more than just the people who provide the lines and the signs, that we had to see ourselves as being the agent of social change and embrace that, because if we wanted people to use this stuff, we better make it delightful for them to do so. And that was our epiphany at that moment, and that's what we started doing. And so we started hosting all kinds of big, big, big events. And our three things that have been the most effective in Portland. One is these big events, like car-free events that are enormous and really get people out experiencing their public space in ways that they've never done before. Second is personal travel encouragement programs, really working one-on-one with people to give them the information about how biking and walking and transit and how to do it and how to deal with dressing on bike and how to deal with locking and how to deal with carrying things and how to deal with transporting kids and all of the kind of details that are barriers for people. And then the third program is Safe Routes to School, and that is getting it not as like Fort Collins is doing. It's like in the schools that every kid is getting some kind of bike safety education, and this becomes part and parcel of the way things are done in Fort Collins or in any place. And so every kid that grows up becomes an adult who's had the experience of biking as a child and being sensitive and understanding the rules of the road. This is what you see in Europe, and this is what we need to do in the United States. Now we learned that bike lanes are good, and Portland has really embraced putting in bike lanes, and that's made a huge difference. And we've learned that immediately what happens is in most cities, like less than 1% of people are biking today, and those tend to be the strong and the fearless dudes, right? You know what I'm talking about. Don't need any bike lanes, you're gonna ride wherever you ride. Got your speedy road bikes? You look like Lance, I know who you are. Or in mountain bikes here in Fort Collins, right? And you've got a lot of that. I mean, you've got a lot of very confident people here because of your sporty culture. And we've got some people who are never gonna ride a bike, and that's just all there is to it. But we've got, like in Fort Collins, 6 to 8% of the people that are biking regularly already. And then if you talk to people and you do surveys, you find that there's a big chunk of the population we found in Portland that said, look, I would like to bike. I think it's a good idea. My friends bike, but I'm afraid. Okay, I'm afraid of biking on major roads. Even with those bike lanes, it's just a line. That's not enough. I'm scared. I'm scared of traffic. I'm scared of cars hitting me. I'm scared, and that we need to do more. So obviously the trails and stuff that you've done, and the bike lanes are a good start, but we need to do more. And so more and more trails. And so this is kind of the spectrum of the people. We've got all the way through to how do we really get that next generation to just embrace bicycling as part of daily life. Now again, in Portland, we've got this river running through it, and we've got freeways not only on one side of the river, but on both sides of the river. Those freeway builders of that era, very clever in picking that prime riverfront property and slapping down them freeways right next to it. And at the time, there was one place on the east side of the river, and as soon as it was put there, City Council realized, we are stuck with a lemon that is right next to the river. And that would be a really great place to put everything but a freeway. And so they started voting to bury the freeway, move the freeway, elevate the freeway, get rid of the freeway. And they kept voting and re-voting, and it was going to cost $1 gazillion, and they could never quite figure out what they were going to do. And you can see it's right next to the river. Very hard to put a trail there. And they had sort of tried to stick a trail in there, but they didn't get very far. Wasn't a great trail. So they decided we're going to put in, we're just going to ignore the river. We're going to ignore the freeway. Just ignore it. To heck with you. You live over there. What we're going to do is we're going to build a trail, and in the parts where it's too tight, we're going to float it in the river. We'll just float it right in the river. This is what it looks like. So some of you have been to downtown Portland and you've seen this. Well, you don't know how you're having the flooding here right now, how the rivers are running really high? The Willamette River in downtown Portland is so high that this trail is all the way up to the top. See, it rises up and down on these spires, and it's literally up at the top, and they have closed it because it's you can't get on it. Because of the same thing, the snow melt, and it's still raining, and it's really, really, really high rushing waters. But okay, so we've got this freeway, and one of my business partners, George Hudson, I worked at the transportation department, and he worked at the city of Portland, and this is at the Parks Bureau, and this is before we both left the city and became consultants. He was leading this project for the city of Portland. Now, as you can imagine, putting a trail in a navigable waterway is not for the faint of heart, okay? This river is like a freeway of boats. We have all kinds of personal watercraft, and we have freight going up and down the river, barges, and we have Navy ships, and we have tourist ships, and we have everything you can imagine constantly going up and down this river. We have the Coast Guard. We have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because we have endangered coho salmon in the river. We also have the U.S. EPA because there are bald eagles nesting nearby. We have the Federal Highway Administration, the Oregon Department of Transportation. There's also a Class 1 railroad. The Union Pacific railroads are a pain in the butt to deal with. And there's a railroad that runs just, you can't see it, but it's just over there. There's 30 regulatory agencies involved in this. And George, my partner, has the audacity to propose this trail in the river. You know, I think he was insane, really. But 10 years he's working on this trail. He's getting permit after permit after permit after permit. And he gets to the end of it, and he's gotten a permit for a very narrow window of construction, which is time to not disturb the bald eagles and not disturb the salmon as they're going upriver, the baby salmon, as they're going up the river. So you've got this very narrow window of construction. He has 2 permits that he has to get. And one of them's from the Oregon Department of Transportation, and one of them's from the Army Corps of Engineers. And they both said, we'll give you the permit when the other one gives the permit first. Anybody that's ever dealt with government agencies has been there, right? Or school districts or anything else. Like, no, you give me the form. No, you give me the form. So he's kind of stuck in this place, and he's trying and trying and trying. And he finally convinces the Army Corps of Engineers to give him a conditional permit based upon him getting the other permit. So he, at that moment, literally takes the permit, and he gets in his car and drives down to Salem, the capital of Oregon. It's a 45-minute drive. And he waits. He goes to find the guy, and they say he's in a meeting. So he goes to where the guy's meeting is, and he sees in the window the guy's having the meeting. George literally sticks his head in the window and tries to get his attention. He's being ignored, obviously aggressively ignoring. You've seen this. And George is literally pacing back and forth in the hallway for like an hour. Very patient. The guy comes out of the door and sees George and literally runs down the hall. And George starts chasing him down the hall. And the guy turns the corner and he goes into the bathroom. And George follows him into the bathroom. And he stands by the door with the permit in hand and a pen, and he waits until the guy does his business and finishes up and washes his hands. And he stands there by the door and he hands him the pen and the permit, and he says, "Gotcha." And we figure at this point that it's appropriate because honestly, this river at this point is like an open air toilet. So to get the permits in a toilet makes perfect sense. From the day that this trail opens, and this is the floating walkway part of it, hundreds and hundreds of people come down, and people are walking, and they're jogging, and they're riding their bikes. But the Oregonian, the main paper in Oregon, the main newspaper, says that this is it's a pencil-thin, noisy new park along the freeway. Will never be used. Waste of money. That's what they said about this trail. And then you guys know what happened on September 11th a decade ago. And 10 days later, people came down to the river, and they stood along this trail, and you can go along the trail, and you can go on a bridge to the other side, and you can stand in a big circle, basically. Stand in a big circle along the river with candles in this great moment of solidarity with thousands of people in downtown Portland just crying and singing, and it was incredibly beautiful and moving. And the next day, the Oregonian ate its words. They said, that was beautiful. And by the end of the year, they said it was the best investment the city had made. And so we learned from this, okay? We learned that backlash is normal because changing built infrastructure and deeply ingrained habits is really, really hard. And it's bound to create resistance and pushback. And so we learned at this point that you've got to have thick skin, and you've got to be really patient, and you've got to be in it for the long haul. These changes do not happen overnight. They take time. Portland's bikeway network in the early 1980s, almost nothing. Then we added our bike lanes, and we added a lot of bicycle boulevards on the neighborhood streets, which are amazing, and a lot of off-street trails. And today's Portland Bikeway Network is about 325 miles of bikeways and growing very rapidly, even today. We're continuing to add more and more. We've added color all throughout the city to delineate where there's conflicts between motorists and cyclists. So where bicyclists have priority, but a motorist has to cross the bike lane to get into a turn lane or come off of a freeway or something, there's green to really let us all know that we need to be cautious in this area, but specifically really to wake up motorists. And this is very common in European cities, and we brought it to Portland. We also added a network of signage all throughout the city to tie the network together. And it doesn't just have the destinations, it has mileage and it has time. And the time is based on a 10-mile-an-hour cycling speed, which is quite slow, right? Most of us can bike about that, if not significantly faster, depending on what bike you're on, what your purpose is. Yeah, some of you are going, phew, that's nothing. But this is a great little secret, because anybody that's starting out biking and they get there instead of 15 minutes, they get there in 12, they feel really strong, They're like, yeah, man, I feel good. Whew. And this is all really what we're trying to do, is create for people an impression that biking is delightful and fun and easy. It's not, you don't have to get in your sporty clothes. You don't have to change into Lycra and clicky shoes, although, feel free to do that. But you can just bike like I do every day in your high heels and your skirts. This is just how we get around. It's not, it doesn't have to be this, kind of ultra Lance Armstrong thing. We put in we started putting in separated bike signals. Many of you have been to Europe, have seen these. It's so simple and it makes so much sense. When you drive, you have signals. When you are walking, you have signals. Biking is not the same as driving or walking. We need a separate system that separates motor vehicle turning movements from cyclist through movements. So we've got putting in bike signals. We put in a lot of really good bike parking. And, a decade after the business community just laughed me out of the room. And I've got this chapter in my book. The book is all about these stories that I'm telling. So it's not a technical manual. It's just these stories, of these fun stories of the people behind the scenes. And the story of the bike parking stuff, I tell you what, I almost just about lost my mind when these business people were torturing me over that bike parking. But 10 years later, we started offering, after I'd left the city, my colleagues, they had developed a fund. So if you didn't want to put in bike parking, you still had to give money to this fund. And they went to businesses and they said, would you like to trade off a car parking space for bike parking? And as you guys know from downtown Fort Collins, that's an awfully good thing to do, right? Good for business. And so 75 businesses immediately said, well, heck yes, that's a good idea. We can have 20 customers instead of one. Ugh. So there's a big waiting list, and that's going really well. Now, Portland is moving towards protected bike lanes, much more separation at this point, where we've flipped it. The parking is on the outside, and there's a buffered area where, and then the bike lane is against the curb. So it creates a much higher feeling of protection. Yeah, it's nice. You have to pay special attention to the intersections, though. It's complicated technically. We've been integrating bike safety education into all our schools, and this is my kids' school. We went from having almost nobody biking to about 40% of the kids biking. At peak, it rains a lot in Portland, so I'll be honest, the kids don't bike all year round. Kind of is dark in the winter, but then they take the bus or walk, so that's okay. But we had this incredible event called the Tour de Lad. It was like, the Tour de France, and we got the kids all out biking, and their parents really got into it, and it's a really amazing way that we've gotten the kids biking. We really started working on the maintenance aspects of biking as well, and if you don't clear the glass from those bike lanes and fix those drainage grates and all that potholes and stuff, then you might as well just go home, because all the details really matter, right, when you're biking. And I knew from my days biking in DC where I got flats all the time how bad it was. And so I went to the maintenance bureau again and I strapped donuts onto my bike and showed up there and trying to be all cheerful and friendly and said, so guys, tell me about what you guys do here. Well, they go, why don't you come out with us? So I go out with the street sweeper. And they go out at night, at midnight, and so I show up with coffee and donuts, and we climb up into the cab of the Zamboni thingy here, the street sweeper, and it's like a big dental polishing tool, brushing the street. And we go up on that Burnside Bridge, and because there's a bike lane against the curb, and I'd gotten a lot of complaints about that bike lane having glass in it. And so we go across the bike lane, the guys put down the brushes, we get out of the cab, we walk back to where it was, and we find that there's still a ton of glass in the bike lane, just twinkling in the night sky. And so the brushes weren't doing their job. And the guy's like, how about that? Well, what do you know? And he gets back in the cab, and he starts flipping all these switches and turning all these dials, 6, 8, 10, 11. Never to 11, no. And he makes a U-turn in the middle of the bridge. Don't do this, it's not a good idea. And then does another one, and he sweeps it again, and voila, the glass is gone. And at this point, I start cataloging all the requests I'm getting, and after about a year of this, I go back to them and I go, well, see, here's my map, and here's all the locations, which are the same ones over and over again. And he says, well, look at that Burnside Bridge just keeps coming up, and he says, you know what? I actually drive over that bridge every night into downtown Portland. I could just sweep it every night. And I'm like, oh, great, thanks for letting me know. Now, a year later, but I'll take it, right? And so after that, the maintenance bureau really embraced this, and it became another kind of lesson that it didn't cost anything. I mean, he was already driving over the bridge, and it was really about working within the institution, top-down leadership saying, yes, we want to do this, but bottom-up willingness to find ways to integrate this mission into their work. And that with this kind of top-down, bottom-up work together that we can you've got to institutionalize bicycle transportation into every facet of city government, and it's hard to do that, but that we can make that happen. Now, all the cities in the United States are on a continuum. Now, you've got our hometown, Dallas, Texas, where the last time that they did a bike map was in 1992, and it's like about a book, about yay thick, and you've got to fold it out, and they've got these numbered little route thingies, and nobody has any clue what those numbers mean, and they don't have any bike lanes, but they're starting to put in some stuff down there in Dallas. And then you've got Copenhagen, where 30% of the people ride bikes every single day. And biking, nobody is a cyclist. They think the term cyclist is baffling. Cyclist? What are you talking about? We're just people. And we ride bikes. And almost all of us ride bikes at least some of the time to get around. So you've got a spectrum. And I think Fort Collins is on the upper end of the United States, really right at the tippy tops already, echelon, with Davis, California, and Boulder, and Portland, and being right at the cutting edge. And so, the question becomes, so we've got Portland, and we got Chicago's coming on strong, and New York is doing amazing things. San Francisco, Boston, we're all kind of part of this revolution at this point. Have you been to Vancouver, BC lately? You've seen what they've done? They put in these two-way separated bikeways on one side of the road. Bike signals all along. It's actually really cool. Now, if you guys like to go really fast on your bikes, you won't like this. It's not really meant for fast cyclists at all. It's really meant for very slow, urban, comfortable. Well, there's no stop signs, but there are a lot of lights. You have to stop at a lot of lights, yeah. Which is kind of a bummer. It's slow, but it's fabulous. Washington, D.C., they've got a two-way bikeway right on Pennsylvania Avenue going by the White House. This just went in about 2 years ago. Berkeley, California, and there's so many cities. And at Portland State University, where I teach, we do, this is where I met DK last year, actually, when he came to our class at Portland State University to help, where we're trying to help professionals kind of re-experience what it's like to really create a bicycle and pedestrian-friendly city. Now, Portland's data is pretty impressive. I'm kind of a data geek. We have 18% of people. We went from having almost less than 1% of people biking to 8% of people use the bike for their commute trip every day. 18% of people citywide say they use the bike at least part of the time for their commute vehicle. This shows bike use on 4 downtown bridges. Went from a couple thousand in the early 90s to 17,000 daily biking trips today. Almost 18,000. In lockstep with the creation of our bikeway network, that's the blue bars. we've got 4 different ways of measuring it. No matter how we measure it, it's all going up, different scale, but no matter how we measure it, it's all going up. So we know that's a good thing. Bike use has gone up, that's the green line. Car use has stayed flat, but we have more population, we have more jobs. It's really that we've created opportunities for people to get places on bike, and they're doing that. And here's the really good news. This is the crash rate plummeting as bike use has gone up. So that's really the fabulous news is, yes, there is safety in numbers. Yes, Fort Collins can realize its vision of eliminating fatalities and reducing crashes significantly. In our schools, we've gone from almost none of the kids biking to having, it's a range. Some schools have 10%, some have as high as 40 or 50% of kids biking. Almost every school has some form of bike safety education. You won't be very impressed by this because Fort Collins has enormous bike industry in Fort Collins and Boulder, but we don't have anything like Cat Eye or New Belgium, but we have a $100 million local bike industry anyway, of all kinds of little small shops and whatnot. And people think, and believe me, politicians love this. This is great news. Now you would think this cost us a lot of money, but the truth is the entire thing was done for less than 1% of Portland's transportation budget. Yes. Less than 1%. Less than 1%. Not a bad deal. And in fact, the entire thing, all of it, all the trails and all the bridge improvements and even the floating one, which cost a fortune, and all the encouragement activities and all the bike parking cost about $60 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but that is about the cost of 1 mile of urban freeway. Sorry? They weren't paying you. Yeah. I know. $32,000, yes, good salary. Okay. I've been working all across the U.S. Since 1999, all across North America, including on public bike sharing. You've seen the one over in Denver, so we operate the one in Washington, D.C. Let me finish up in Dallas. So in Dallas, they built a trail. It's called the Katy Trail, and it's 3 miles long. And some of you are nodding because you've been on it, right? It's right by the American Airlines Center. And there's Katy Trails all over the country. You know what I'm talking about, okay? And it's 3 miles, so you kind of go back and forth, and that's about it. And it's very, very popular because there's just not that many places you can ride a bike in Dallas. It's an abandoned railroad. Right, it's an abandoned railroad, so they can make that happen. Other ones, but they built this, and it was a very exciting moment in Dallas. But then some of the leaders who built this were kind of like, wait a second, now we get to the end of the trail right here at the American Airlines Center where the Mavericks are playing, probably right now, and they said, now what? And so they called my firm, and they said, would you come down here and consult with us on how to build an entire network of trails in downtown Portland, and I mean in downtown Dallas. And I just thought, come on, really? Downtown Dallas? I remember downtown Dallas as a kid. That's a place that you get lost. That's about the best I can say about downtown Dallas. Well, we went down there and they said, yes, absolutely. We don't want bike lanes because they're not good enough. We want to look like Copenhagen, completely separated trails. And every business that I met with said, heck yes, we love this idea. How can we help? Can we give you some of our property? I mean, it was a stunning, positive energy that was happening in downtown Dallas that completely blew me away. So I went home. I was there for quite a few times for this project, and I went home to visit the folks. And you guys remember Tommy? And Tommy says, okay, nice to see you, big hug, and tell me about the trails. And I tell him, and he says, okay, great, come out to the garage. I have something to show you. And hanging in the garage is his new road bike. And suddenly I noticed that, dang, he's looking pretty good. He was like 72 at this moment, and he had lost weight, and he was really in fantastic shape. Now, you guys, our dad is kind of a hobby fella, so whenever he gets obsessed with is what he's obsessed with at the time. And so he was on race cars and racing boats for a while, big sailboats, small, little sailboats, welding. And then my mom, this is the new one, and Mom is like, I like this one. Significantly less expensive. And look at him. He looks really, really good. He's in really good shape. And Tommy at this point, he wants to say, you were right, but that's really just not going to happen. So he's like, okay, let's ride. Because he bought me a bike at a garage sale. He bought me a bike and some gloves. And he said, let's go out for a ride. And that was his way of saying, I'm with you now, right? Little late than never. Never too late, never too late. So I figure if Dallas, Texas can become a bike-friendly place, then the rest of us have no excuses, absolutely no excuses whatsoever. And if people like Tommy have come this far that they can go from thinking that this is some crazy freako enviro hippie crap to accepting it and trying to find ways to incorporate it in their life, then we've come farther than I've ever dreamed. Thank you.